Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG, coming at you with the top 5 Pioneer deck lists in April 2023, starting out with Rakdos Midrange. Now, the only thing that has truly remained constant in the Pioneer format, and to a lesser extent the Explorer format in the last several weeks, is that Rakdos remains the Tier 1 deck of the format. There's been some jostling around after the Pro Tour, but the efficiency of discard spells into threats, into Shieldred, continues to do very well. The deck is very balanced. It can be aggressive, it can be controlling. It has the sideboard tools to switch those roles as well. It has additional disruption for control and combo. And this deck just continues to perform over well. It has probably the best pound-for-pound card selection at each place on the thing. It's not dependent upon a particular engine resolving. It can be overpowered. Now, there are Fires of Invention decks and Lotus Field combo. Both can be tricky for the deck. But overall, this deck is very balanced. It's very good into the aggressive decks that pop up from time to time. Has a game plan against mono green, albeit it's a slight dog to the deck. But overall, this is still very much your number one deck of the format. Probably overall the most balanced deck of the format. And, a deck that people just can't seem to stop playing, and it is the one putting up the most consistent results in the format right now. Number 2, I would argue right now, is Greasefang. Now, Greasefang is probably the fastest combo deck in the format. After the banning of Winota, this kind of became the de facto creature combo deck, with obviously Greasefang and then the vehicles. It has a slightly faster clock overall than Lotus Field combo, with the ability to get a Parhelion back on turn 3 and then kill on turn 4. Lotus Field can certainly kill in around turn 4-ish, but this is a deck that very much has to be on people's radars. It comes in a couple different varieties now. Basically, you have the Traverse the Uvenwald package with Vestal Nascency, or you have the Eldritch Evolution variant. Both versions are Abzan based. Esper and Mardu do exist, although they are much less frequent in nature. The power of this deck is mostly in the fact that it is quick. You put the pressure on your opponent to always hold up a removal or have Graveyard Hate. You do have some counters to it with things like Witherbloom Command, potentially Assassin's Trophy or Abrupt Decay at the sideboard. And you do have a decent backup plan of things like Liliana of the Veil, Asika's Chariot, and sometimes copies of Shieldred out of the sideboard. This deck very much performs fairly well. It puts a lot of pressure on decks like Mono Green, on Blue-White Control. While those decks certainly can have reasonable game plans against this deck, really is only a dog to Graveyard Hate and Instant Speed Removal, both of which, while they see some play in the format, aren't as readily available. And this is really the only graveyard deck in the format outside of a deck like Is It Phoenix. So it is hard to dedicate a bunch of sideboard slots going into an open meta. Now, if you happen to know your meta and you expect a lot of Greasefang, certainly you can shut this down if you want to. But this is a very powerful combo deck that really puts the pressure on the opponent to answer things in a very timely manner. Well, I would personally put this deck at number 3 in the format, and that is Gruul Midrange. It has not been putting up the results to back that up. Personally, I prefer this deck as probably the deck that I would play the most in the format. It's a deck that I used to get to a Mythic and Explore last month. Only the second time I've ever done that, but I don't really play a ton of Arena enough to grind Mythic all the time. But this deck kind of has it all, much like Rakdos. It's a little bit more aggressive based and obviously has a fairly decent matchup into Rakdos with all the vehicles and stuff, just being able to outgrind what it does. Without the card Reckless Stormseeker, this deck would be much, much worse. Decks like Mono Green and such would just overpower it given enough time. Stormseeker and the Acrone War are really its key tools in those style of matchups, so it can generally play well into a creature or mid-range or control meta. Where it tends to struggle a little bit are decks like Lotus Field combo, decks like Greasefang, hence why you see a lot of instant speed removal like Rending Volley. You see things like Scavenging Ooze, Unlicensed Hearse, etc. You also see Damping Sphere or sometimes copies of Alpine Moon in the sideboard for Lotus Field combo. And this deck really kind of wanes and waxes a little bit right now as Lotus Field rises and falls. And, you know, maybe much like a little bit like Mono Green, the gameplay gets a little bit repetitive. People don't like picking it up as much. But I do think this is one of the more powerful, resilient decks in the format, and certainly a deck you need to be aware of in today's current meta. Number 4 deck, Lotus Field Combo. Now, I played this deck quite a bit on the channel months ago. It really hasn't changed a lot since. One of the things that has happened is there's been a move away from things like Mastermind's Acquisition or Fae of Wishes for a more... You're not reliant on those things getting extracted, so you're generally reliant on winning through the newer builds or winning through Peer Through the Abyss, the opponent a bunch of times until they die, either from drawing their deck out or just taking too much damage, or Lair of the Hydra, tap all your crap down, kill you with a large Lair of the Hydra. It's kind of the direction the deck has gone, but the rest of the deck is much the same. You're trying to set up the early Lotus Field Thespian Stage combo, getting a bunch of mana online, and then just winning from there via Emergent Ultimatum, into Omniscience, or many other different lines you can take, most of which just involve a bunch of mana, casting a bunch of big things, and then winning with a ham sandwich. The deck, obviously, very good into a mid-range meta, good against Gruul, good against Rakdos, can fight through a lot of blue-white shenanigans, although it can struggle sometimes. Though you do have things like Leer and Sphinx of the Final Word to fight over their counter spells. Beyond that, this deck is very good in a meta where aggro is kind of either non-existent or very much cut down. And right now, aggro is almost an all-time low in the last 6 months or so. You still see some mono white pop up, you still see some spirits pop up, but you know, when the main aggressive deck that has popped up from time to time has been Angels, the format's a little bit slow for aggressive decks right now, and this is kind of the slow, resilient combo deck that does very well in the meta. It's one chink in the armor, tends to be mono green, but actually mono green's on a bit of a decline right now. So Lotus Field Combo, probably the 4th best deck in the format right now. Kind of mixes well with what's else at the top of the format currently. So I'm going to put this as 5A, and that's mono green. Mono green has not been putting up the results in the bigger events of late. Sure, it still puts up a top 16, a top 8 here and there, but comparatively to a few months ago when it was neck and neck with Rakdos, or was like 1B to Rakdos' 1A, this deck has certainly fallen off. Now, part of that, the deck is kind of boring to play. Once you understand what the deck does, it's very consistent in what it does. It's all about the early sequencing, what hands you keep, and then just trying to find a way to get it to as much mana as possible, as quickly as possible. You have a few flex slots in the deck, you know, maybe 2 or 3 flex slots where you can play Teferi or answers to other early aggressive decks. The deck has an infinite combo that can mill your opponent out. Basically, the deck can do it all if given enough time and setup. Downside, the deck is vulnerable to its early mana being messed with, and it's also vulnerable to Karn the Great Creator being extracted is a big problem for the deck. So if you can find a way to keep Karn from resolving and can keep their early mana engines online, you can do a very good job. Rakdos generally plays that game plan. Blue-White Control generally plays that game plan. Now, it's not always easy to execute. Sometimes mono green still does mono green things and breaks out. It is one of the better decks into Lotus Field Combo. It does have a bit of a struggle against Abzan Greasefang if Greasefang has its nut draws. So it's kind of a weird situation where the meta, you have certain decks like Rakdos and Blue-White Control that are just kind of steady throughout the game. You have decks like Gruul that are arguably on the same trajectory as Rakdos and Blue-White, but has a little bit more power in the early game, and it kind of wanes as the mid game goes on. Mono Green has that early ramp set up, and it goes nuts, you know, turn 3, turn 4. Then you have decks like Greasefang that want to do the thing turn 3, turn 4, and while it can play a grindier game, is much worse as the game goes along. So you kind of have this weird crescendo where you have all these mid-range and combo decks kind of duking it out at the top of the thing, and aggro's just kind of being left at home. That said, Mono Green still hasn't been putting up good results lately. Don't know if that's just boredom or not really a lot of ingenuity in the format currently after the Pro Tour. Everybody putting an effort looking at those decks. That said, there are 3 decks that have kind of popped up, but I'll talk about those after we finish our 5B deck. Our 5B deck is blue-white control. Now, I have to say this with a grain of salt because I don't like blue-white control decks. It's just not my style. There are a couple different ways to build them. You have the lay down arms build, and then you have the more traditional blue-white control build. It gets to run things like Castle Ardenvale, Castle Vantress. But blue-white control, best sweepers in the format, good counter spells, kind of crappy spot removal other than lay down arms. Even that has the downside of being a sorcery and you have to play a bunch of planes. But a deck that has reasonable game plans against a lot of the format, has a bunch of counter spells that people have to fight through, whether you're Lotus Field combo or mono green, those kind of decks. Folds a little bit to disruption plus pressure. Thoughtseize is taking your key card into a bunch of pressure, into, say, another discard spell or a planeswalker. You're just forcing them to answer just a bunch of different things. Really puts the deck in a struggle spot, and it really is not good at closing out games quickly. So if you're not an aggro deck, you generally have a pretty good game plan against blue-white control in the post-board games. If you're not angels or humans or to an extent mono red or spirits, you have a game plan. Gruul has a game plan. Rakdos has a game plan. Lotus Field, we've already kind of alluded to, has a game plan. Mono green just slams as many spells into the things as they can and hopes that it's good enough. Solid deck in the format. Kind of is the best control-ish deck, bluish deck in the format right now. But that said, where's the rest of the format going right now? Obviously, you had creativity coming out of the Pro Tour. You've had 4-color Omnath Midrange. I don't think any of those decks have done particularly well. I think creativity was more on the back of the pilots that were piloting it more than the deck's power itself. Now, it's certainly a good Tier 2, Tier 3 deck. Certainly would probably be in the top 10 in the format. As far as newer innovations and things coming in the format, we're going to do a bit of a breakdown video maybe later in the week. But there's obviously the 5-color, 4-color Omnath, Bring to Light deck still floating around, putting up some decent results. There's a newer variant of creativity, which basically the same shell as the Xenagos big ace worm kill you combo, World Spine Worm that I couldn't think of, and has largely been replaced by Atraxa. Atraxa, obviously a bit of a grindier card, is still a threat that can be very difficult to answer. A lot of the removal spells in the format just doesn't kill it. Or if they do, you just reload and play another Atraxa, draw another 5 cards. Very kind of hard to overcome that. As to which version's better, that I don't know, but it is a version that's popped up. Another version that's another deck that's kind of popped up is kind of a variant that's like a pseudo humans deck, but it's like Esper Legends instead of humans. It focuses around all the powerful different legends in the format. Gets to play things like Mox Opal while still playing a little bit. It's kind of like this Esper midrange deck that's just like playing all the good legends in the format. You get to play Gideon and Screeve into Thalia, Davik, Tomic, basically all the various legends that have effects on the game. It kind of has this weird vibe. You get to play Adeline and Rafine as kind of your top end threats, along with Sheoldred. You get to play Plaza of Heroes to both protect your things and cast all your spells. It's certainly a deck that we'll like to explore in time. But those are all kind of decks that are kind of popped up here and there. They haven't put up huge results yet, but certainly things you should be aware of. But this is kind of where the format is right now. Basically, it's Rakdos' world and everything else is just living in it. That's not to say that Rakdos is overpowered, but alas, it is by far and away currently the best deck in the format, at least by the results. And everything else has been doing a pretty decent job. Rakdos is not unbeatable by any means, but certainly a deck that is far and away the best deck results-wise in the format. So if you like these kind of reviews and take a look at the format, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, as we are a Pioneer-only channel, and I hope to see you for the next video.